Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ray from the Bloomfield Public Library. We're excited to launch another year of Opera Talks with Jeffrey Engel. So welcome to Nabucco, and I'll turn the mic over to you, Jeffrey.
So thank you, Sarah, and welcome to our first opera talk of 2024, Verdi's Nabucco. So that's the opening chorus to part one. The early operas of Verdi, following the style of the day, were not divided into acts but into parts. And this is a chorus of the Israelites, and this opera has to do with ancient times, BC times, and the Israelites who have been exiled or taken prisoner to reside, against their will, of course, in Babylonia. And throughout this opera, there's a very strong undercurrent of patriotic feeling. And in fact, the one really great moment in the opera is a chorus that occurs in part three, which I'm sure most of you have heard at least once in your lifetime, called Va Pensiero, which may be the most popular chorus in the entire Verdi canon and maybe in all of opera. Everybody knows the tune. They might not know it comes from Nabucco, but they certainly know the tune. And very often during performances, people sing along or hum along with it. And it is one reason that this opera was an instant success. And it's Verdi's third opera, and it's his first monumental success. Now, the tune is wonderful, and it's a very emotional chorus. We're going to listen to it later, so maybe I'll explain it a bit later. But it has to do with what was occurring in Italy at the time that this opera was premiered in 1842. Now, Verdi was a fervent patriot, believed in a united Italy. And so, from his third opera of 1842, then, until 1849, there are 9 operas, almost every one has a patriotic chorus because of Verdi's great sense of patriotism, his devotion to Italy. And so, in order maybe to appreciate better Nabucco, we should take a look at what was the state of Italy. And for that, we have to go back to Napoleonic times and Napoleonic wars, and Napoleon, who virtually conquers all of Europe except Great Britain. And he's doing very well until he hits Moscow in October of 1812. And then we have the disastrous defeat. The great La Grande Armée of 600,000 men has to trudge back to Paris. And I believe the numbers are only 100,000 survived of the 600,000. Of course, that didn't stop Napoleon, who reorganized another army again, but then is defeated and abdicates on April 14th of 1814. He's exiled to the Isle of Elba. But you can't keep a good man down. And he escapes, forms another army, marches to Paris, And then we have the Battle of Waterloo in June of 1815, and here he is ultimately defeated. Though you should keep in mind, he almost won that battle. Boy, would things have changed had he won it. Now he's exiled to St. Helena, and there he remains until his death. While all this is going on, we have this extraordinary conference taking place in Vienna. It was called the Congress of Vienna. And we have the most powerful leaders in the world gathered all together in the Austrian capital. We have of Russia Alexander I, the Tsar. Of Prussia, we have King Frederick Wilhelm IV. Of Austria, we have Emperor Francis I. And then we have the highest ranking members of the cabinets. You have chancellors, foreign ministers, and they join together in order to redraw the map of Europe. Now we'll skip all of Europe except for Italy. And with Italy, it's going to become 6 states. So no unified Italy at this point. So you have the Austrians, who are given all of northern Italy, Lombardy, Venice, and the Austrian territory amounts to about 1/3 of what we know today as Italy. There are also 2 other states, Modena and Tuscany, given to members of the Austrian Habsburg family. You have the Papal States, obviously under the control of the Pope, and they stem from Rome going north to Bologna, all the way north, pretty much on the Adriatic side of Italy. You have a small state of Parma, which is just below Lombardy. This is Verdi's state. And it's going to be ruled by Marie-Louise, who was the former wife of Napoleon, wife number 2. And she was given this state, and she'll rule it until her death in 1847, and she's allowed to keep her title of Empress. Then we have the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily, which is ruled by the Spanish Habsburgs. And finally we have Sardinia, ruled by Victor Emmanuel, King, Victor Emmanuel I. And together with Sardinia, he's in control of Savoy, Piedmont, and Nice. Now, almost immediately after this is set up, you're going to have the surgents, I don't know if that's a word, surgents, the organization of an independence movement called the Risorgimento, the resurgence, the rebirth. And you're going to have rebels, revolutionaries, terrorists are going to be responsible for terroristic acts, assassinations in Italy, in Spain, in France. And one of the most important is going to be the Carbonari. So Italy is really in a state of turmoil until it's finally unified in 1860, 1861. That still leaves out Venice. That only becomes a part of Italy in 1866. And Rome, which the Papal States will be reduced just to the Vatican under the Pope's control. And that'll happen in 1870, 1871. So,
Hey,
Verdi,
Jeffrey,
yes,
we
yes,
lost part of your head in the video when you were trying to speak a little closer. If you want to just move it up a little. Yeah. I hate to interrupt you. I've been battling with it. Thank you,
that's all right.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm trying to get close to the microphone.
I know, we appreciate it.
So, Verdi is going to be starting his career in the midst of all this truly political turmoil. And he was very political, but in a discreet way. He wasn't one to go out and burn down a building or assassinate someone, but he would use his operas to promote the cause of Italian independence and unification. And so that's why you'll have a sort of subtle chorus. It's sung by the Israelites yearning to be free and to return to their homeland, but it's about Italians yearning to have their own country. And the reaction of audiences, of course, was quite strong and very emotional when they would hear these choruses for the first time. Verdi himself would enter politics. It was mainly through the persuasion of Cavour, the prime minister of the King of Sardinia, who was largely responsible for the unification of Italy. And he persuades Verdi to join the first parliament that opens in 1861. And he remains for 4 years. But again, Verdi wasn't a politician, and he preferred more discreet ways of going about politics, and was bored sitting at a desk listening to everybody fighting, and he doesn't run again after 1865. So back to Nabucco, and as I said, it is going to be this just phenomenal success that launches his career. The first two operas, which we'll mention a little bit later, one was quite a moderate success. The second was an utter fiasco. And it places him on the operatic map. Now, Italy, 1842, is still sort of an operatic factory. You've got dozens of composers writing hundreds of operas. And very, very few of them remain, if any, remain in the repertory today. Now, pre-Verdi, you have who I would refer to as the big three. There's Rossini, but he stops composing operas in 1829. You have Bellini, who finishes his 10th and last opera in 1835, I Puritani, and then dies shortly afterwards. And that leaves Donizetti. And he's still active in the 1840s. Writes a phenomenal number of operas, 66 operas in 27 years. But by the 1840s, he's not in good health. He's lost his wife. He is quasi-depressed. He's composing a bit less. I think there are only 5 or 6 operas dating from the 1840s. There's only one that truly stands out, and occasionally you'll hear someone call it a masterpiece, which is Don Pasquale, which comes a year later in 1843. So that with Nabucco, Verdi becomes the most dominant composer of operas in Italy, and for a period of 51 years. This will last until Falstaff in 1893. And during that period of 51 years, there are only 2 other operas that, by other composers, that still remain in the repertory. One really on the fringe of the repertory, and the other a true repertory work. The first is Arrigo Boito's Mephistopheles, which is produced in 1868, is a failure, but he revises it and has success with it in 1875. Of course, he is also the librettist, or was the librettist for Verdi's Falstaff and Otello. And then you have Ponchielli's La Gioconda, Boito once again, his librettist, and that dates from 1876. No other operas have really held the stage outside of Italy, and barely within Italy, and yet you have this extraordinary number of operas. Mercadante, some 60, Pacini, 85, but none of them come close to Verdi, even though the composers in their lifetime would have some success. Now, Verdi keeps this level of success until Falstaff, when he officially retires, and within a couple of weeks you have the premiere of Falstaff, you have the premiere of Manon Lescaut by Puccini, which is a great success. His third opera took him 3 operas to have a great success. And then Puccini is going to be the dominant composer of opera in Italy until his death in 1924. Now, with Nabucco, as I said, it is his third opera, and maybe I'll just take a little bit of a rest, and I'll play the overture to the opera, which is it's a good overture, and it contains several of the themes that you're going to hear in the opera. So, voila, the overture. Now, before we get into the opera, I would like to talk a little bit about these early years of Verdi, because they were difficult years, marked by lack of success, struggles, and some very severe, I don't know if you could say severe tragedy, but it's tragedy. And he's born in 1813 in a hamlet of about 15 to 20 houses called Le Rencole, which means bill hooks, or a very sharp type of knife. And his father owned a tavern and shop. Father was Carlo Verdi, and his wife Luigia would help run it. And there was really nothing there except a church, San Michele, San Michael's. And it was about 3 miles away from a larger marketing town called Busseto. Now, Le Roncole will be where Verdi will get his first instruction as a youngster. The strange thing is that when he was born and taken to town hall to be registered, he was registered as a Frenchman because Parma was under French control, as well as it had been under Napoleonic control already for decades. And it's kind of odd to think of Verdi as a Frenchman. And in fact, his original names would be Joseph, which is Joseph or Giuseppe, Fortunin Francois Verdi. Obviously, it would be changed later on. And it made me think of, I guess you could say, the complexities of living in the 19th century in terms of questionable boundaries or borders of countries or languages which one would speak. I thought I'd give you a couple of examples, so I'm going to digress a little bit, but this is something that fascinates me. If you take Grieg, for instance, and we think, oh, Edvard Grieg, great Norwegian nationalist composer. And then you realize that, in fact, Grieg spoke Danish because Norway, when he was born in 1843, was under the control of Denmark. There was no Norwegian language. There was a dialect that circulated in the villages, but not in the cities. It was Danish. Plays were given in Danish. You wrote songs or wrote books in Danish, and such was the case with Grieg. It's only during the 1850s that we have a linguist who puts together a Norwegian language, which is called landsmal, or country language. And then a second language was developed called bokmål, and today these two languages exist side by side. So when you think of Grieg as Norwegian nationalist, keep in mind that his roots were in Danish culture and Danish language. We have Franz Liszt. Think of Franz Liszt as this great Hungarian patriot and Hungarian pianist, composer, and conductor. Well, he's born in Western Hungary, but within the Austrian Empire. And so it's under Austrian control. And when he grew up, he learned not Hungarian, but German. That was his first language. Eventually, he settles in Paris in 1827, lives there for a number of years, and it's French that becomes his first language, and he writes in French. He has books and articles published in that language. Hungarian, he never learned it, even throughout his entire life, even though he proclaimed himself as this great Hungarian patriot, and he did a lot for Hungary. He, of course, established the Franz Liszt Academy of Music in 1875. But I believe, if I recall correctly, he could read a speech in Hungarian later in life. It must have been phonetically written, but he couldn't converse or write in Hungarian. A very odd example is the French conductor, and I emphasize French, Charles Munch. Some of you might remember he conducted the Boston Symphony from 1948 to 1962. He was born in Strasbourg in 1891, but Strasbourg was not in France. It was under German control. After the Franco-Prussian War, Alsace-Lorraine becomes German again. And so he was raised as a German, and in fact, during the Great War, 1914, for 4 years, he served in the German military, in the German war machine, so that after the war, and Alsace then reverts back to France, he had to apply for a French passport. And yet we don't think of him as a German conductor today. He is one of the finest French conductors of the first half of the 20th century. And my last example is Sibelius. Again, think of Sibelius, Finland, great Finnish nationalist, patriot. What was his first language? Not Finnish, it was Swedish. Because Finland, when he's born in 1865, is under the control of the Kingdom of Sweden. And it's only in his late 20s that he learns Finnish, and probably spoke it with a Swedish accent. So it's very confusing, this question of borders, of language in the 19th century, and until countries finally sort themselves out geographically on the map after World War I. Of course, there'll be some changes later on, for instance, with Yugoslavia. But I find it fascinating to think that Verdi was actually born as a Frenchman. So he's going to study with priests as a 4-year-old, and his studies will include music. At the age of 7, his parents buy him a spinet piano, and at the age of 9, he's going to sub as the organist at the San Michele Church in Le Rencole, and then become its permanent organist at the age of 9. Now you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, child prodigy, how extraordinary. No, he was a pretty bad keyboard player. In music history, 3 of our great composers were bad pianists. Wagner was not good, Verdi was not good, and Berlioz couldn't even play the piano. Almost all the others were very fine pianists. Rossini, who greatly admired Verdi, once wrote to him, "From Gioacchino Rossini, pianist of the 4th class, to Giuseppe Verdi, pianist of the 5th class." So it was known that Verdi was not a good pianist. Yet he was able to perform his organ duties in the church. But at age 10, he moves on to Busseto, and he's going to continue his studies there. This little hamlet of Le Roncole had maybe about 100 people. Busseto had a bit under 7,000 people, maybe a little less than that. And it was a very prosperous market town. And by 1826, he's starting to compose music to be performed locally. Music for church, music for the theater. He wrote 100 sinfonias and 100 marches, some piano music. And in 1831, he's going to move into the household of Antonio Barezzi, who was a very prosperous merchant, very important personality in town, was the sort of founder of or in charge of the Philharmonic Society, which had some 70 members. And he's going to live in his house and give lessons to his daughter Margherita in piano and singing. Now, Barezzi thinks it would be a good idea that Verdi attend the Milano Conservatory. And so at age 18, he applies, but he's rejected. First of all, they considered him too old. Second of all, and here again we get this question of borders, he was considered a foreigner because he was from Parma. And Milano, of course, is in Lombardy, ruled by the Austrians. Parma, ruled by the French. So he was excluded for those two reasons, plus they found he was deficient in counterpoint and, of course, piano. And this is something that really gnawed at him the rest of his life. So that when later on, when he was so highly successful, the conservatory approached him and said they wanted to honor him, he refused their honor, saying, "You didn't want me when I was young, and so you're not going to have me when I'm old." So he doesn't get into the conservatory, but he studies in Milano with a decent musician by the name of Vincenzo Lavigna. And he was a coach and accompanist at La Scala, so he was a good connection for Verdi. And he would study with him for some 4 years. And part of his studying or training would be to attend performances of operas at La Scala as well as rehearsals. And this was an introduction to opera to Verdi, and he could learn a lot by attending performances. So after 1835, we're in 1836, he returns to Busseto, and he's going to become the sort of music director of the town. He'll head the Philharmonic Society. It was mainly a teaching position, and he remains there until 1839. But meanwhile, he had made a lot of very important connections in Milano. He had entered into the high society thanks to Lavigna and some others. He was making noise. People were aware of his talents. And he is going to get a commission from La Scala to write an opera. Now, before that, he does marry Margherita Barezzi in 1836. And they have 2 children, daughter Virginie, or Virginia, and then Eliseo, son. And this is when tragedy strikes. He loses both children before the age of 2, each one, and then he loses his wife in 1840, Margherita. On top of that, he does write a first opera, Oberto, which will be performed in 1839 at La Scala, and it has a moderate success in that it has some 14 performances, and that was considered successful enough that the intendant of La Scala gives him a commission for 3 more operas. And in 1840 he follows with a comic opera, Un giorno di regno. And he only wrote 2 comic operas in his life, that and then his last opera, Falstaff. This was a fiasco. It was shut down after only 1 performance. And this, plus the family losses, throws him into a deep depression, and he renounces composition. But the intendant of La Scala is very persuasive and saw the talent in Verdi and convinces him to try a 3rd opera, which will be Nabucco. And he's going to collaborate with his librettist of the first opera, one, I always forget his first name, Temistocle uh, Solera. Now you can imagine that somebody that has a first name like Temistocle is not going to be your usual Joe. He's born in 1815 in Ferrara, and details about his life are a bit vague, but apparently he did study as a youngster in Vienna. And at some point, I believe when he was studying there, his father was imprisoned, probably for political reasons, but again, that can't be confirmed. And this turns him into a fervent Italian patriot, very anti-Austrian. And he's going to run away from school and join the circus. Eventually, he makes his way to Milano and becomes rather popular as a poet. And he was quite an imposing individual. He was, by description, huge in size, had flashing eyes, and a stentorian voice. Men were kind of fearful of him. Women referred to him as the wild thing. Makes you think of the song by the Trogs in 1966. Wild thing, it makes my heart sing, something of the sort. And he's going to have quite some success as a writer, and so he will be paired with Verdi for Oberto. And he will collaborate with Verdi on 5 operas. Of course, Nabucco will be another one. And he's going to leave Milano after their last collaboration at Tilla, which is in 1845. In 1846, he goes off to Spain. He has married a singer who's under contract in Madrid, and he acts as an impresario in a number of Spanish towns. Remains there till 1859, returns to Milano, and again, this is vague exactly what his role was, but he acts as a go-between with Cavour, Prime Minister, and Louis Napoleon, Emperor of France. Now, I did a little historical research, and I believe this probably has something to do with one of the wars of Italian independence, which ended with the Battle of Solferino in 1859. That same year, he becomes this advisor. And this was a terrible battle. It was Austrians pitted against the French and the Sardinians. And the Austrians lost some 25,000, or let's say there were 25,000 casualties. The French and the Italians close to 4,000. And Louis Napoleon was so disgusted by all this bloodshed, that he signed a truce with the Emperor of Austria without telling the Italians. And with this truce, he is going to be given parts of Lombardy, which then he is going to give to Victor Emmanuel, who in exchange will give him Nice and Savoy. And because of Solferino, a couple years later in 1864, we have the foundation of the International Red Cross. So we have our friend Solera becoming involved in all this. And, I did leave out one thing. When he was in Spain, he became a secret advisor to Queen Isabella II, and possibly was also her lover. Now, she had married a gay duke, and I don't mean that in the sense that he was cheerful, though apparently he was, from Cadiz, and they couldn't have any children, so she had 9 illegitimate children from her guardsmen. So maybe the rumor that he was having a relationship with her, not too far from the truth. But going back to his stay in Italy, he's now going to become a police chief in a number of different towns in Italy, and then is even invited to Egypt to reorganize the police department of the Khedive there. Returns to Milano and dies there in 1878 in abject poverty. Verdi and he had, after Attila, not really been on good terms. Solera was pretty much bragging that Verdi's success was due to him. Verdi didn't appreciate that, but nevertheless, when he learned of the financial woes of Solera, Verdi took part in a fund and gave a lot of money. He was very generous in this respect to help him through his last years. But they will collaborate on Nabucco, and so you have two patriots working together on this opera. And it'll be premiered March 9th, 1842, and as I said, will be a monstrous success. Now, it's towards the end of the season, so it's only going to get some eight or nine performances, but then it's taken up again, a revival in the fall, and it gets 57 performances, which at that time was a record for an opera at La Scala, and very quickly spreads throughout Italy. Performed within 2 years in Vienna and Lisbon and Madrid. Comes to America in 1848. Oddly, is not performed at the Met until 1960, and only gets 9 performances. Stellar cast: Leone Rizanek, Cornell McNeil, Cesare Siepi. Then I lose track of it. I don't believe there are any. Well, I know for certain there were no performances till 1987. Then I lose track of it, and it does get a new production in 2001. So within the next 22 years, it's performed 7 times, which means it's becoming a popular and a repertory opera. Now, I guess the next stage of this presentation would be that I would tell you the plot. And I was looking at it, and after 1 or 2 sentences, I said, "No way, Jose. This is holiday time. I'm still suffering from fried holiday brain, and I can't make heads or tails of this." So for those of you who may be disappointed, you know how to use a computer. All you have to do is go to Nabucco, plot, press a button, and you will get the plot. All I will say is that it takes place in ancient Babylonia, a great empire that extended from the Persian Gulf all the way north to southern Turkey, and was centered around the 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And this takes place during the reign of, if I can pronounce it, Nebuchadnezzar the second. God help us, there were 2 of them. And this was a great king who transforms Babylon into one of the great ancient cities, the Hanging Gardens, I'm sure you've heard of, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And he rules from, these BC years always get me confused because you're going backwards. He rules from, 605 BC until 562 or so. And eventually Babylonia is conquered, defeated. The city is destroyed. Alexander the Great dies there in 323, and it's after that that the city really disappears. And Nebuchadnezzar, don't try to say it fast, Jeffrey, is going to attack and destroy Jerusalem and the ancient temple, and then take all the Israelites back to Babylon, where they'll stay for some 70 years. And that's basically what this opera is about. Then you have 2 daughters of the king, Abigail, which we would say Abigail, and then I think her name is Fenna, and she's in love with an Israelite, and Abigail is the villainess, and the king goes mad, and then he comes back to his sanity, and he converts, and Abigail takes poison, and I can't deal with it. So that just leaves us with a little bit of time to play a few excerpts, and we'll go to part 1 again. And we have the high priest of the Israelites, Zechariah, and this is at the moment where the Babylonians are at the gates of Jerusalem, and the Israelites are obviously in a panic, and Zechariah is trying to organize them to get ready to fight the Babylonians. And he sings a cavatina cabaletta. This was very, very popular form in the first half of the 19th century Italian opera. The cavatina being a very lyrical, slow aria, and then followed by sort of the very technical and fast cabaletta. This is a little bit unusual in that it's a cabaletta for the high priest, and you have interruptions by a chorus. Normally the chorus does not take place. So here we have, it's a short cabaletta. Oh, we skip ahead and we have the arrival of Nabucco, which is Nebuchadnezzar. And this is just an orchestral excerpt. This is a military march as he is approaching he's at the gates of Jerusalem. So that would probably be a revolt if I didn't play Va Pensiero. Maybe there's some of you who can't recall the tune. but it'll certainly sound very familiar. And all this is you've got the Israelites now enslaved, they're in chains, and they're doing forced labor, and they're yearning for their country, their homeland, which they do receive at the end of the opera. I mean, they are released. Number 8. That much of the plot I can tell you. Here we go. So to conclude, we'll go back to the end of part 1 And this is the grand finale, which is quite exciting. And what has happened is that now Jerusalem has been taken over by Nabucco. Zechariah has been captured, and he and all the Israelites are going to be transported back to Babylonia, and the Temple of Solomon shall be destroyed. Poor soprano ran out of gas on their high C. So that's it for Nabucco. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing Carmen. And I'm going to focus a lot on the last couple months of Bizet's life, which weren't very happy. A bad marriage, some infidelities, illness, and also refute this kind of popular notion that he died out of great sorrow over the failure of Carmen. And this is not true, and Carmen was not a great failure. But we'll get into that when we do Carmen.